So now let's talk about neural modalities. Neural modality refers to function. What does that nerve do? We have two main functions. We have motor, both voluntary and involuntary, but motor means to move. Sensory, we have two types of sensory, both general and special sensory. So let's break those down. Let's look at the motor modality. Motor modality is called efferent because it will cause an effect in the body. We see that this is always information that travels from the brain out to the body or from the spinal cord out to the body if it's a reflex. But this is something that the brain causes to happen in the body. And whether it's movement of skeletal muscle, change in rate of cardiac muscle, change in rate of smooth muscle, or secretion from the glands, it's still causing change. So glands, even though they don't actually move, it's still called motor. So motor is efferent. And we have two types. We have voluntary motor, which involves skeletal muscle because we don't voluntarily move our stomach. It moves on its own. But we do move the skeletal muscle. And we notate that in the short form as SE, which stands for somatic efferent. But if it helps you to remember, use skeletal efferent, SE. And it's about one multipolar neuron. Remember that the multipolar neuron is the one that has all these branches off of it. And then they come out like this. An easy way to draw a multipolar neuron is to draw a star, because this kind of indicates that this is coming off and then the axon. So I say that the easiest way to draw a multipolar neuron, if you're just drawing it fast, draw a star. We all learned how to draw that 5-point star in kindergarten, and it goes really well. Involuntary motor is called visceral efferent, or VE. Visceral refers to the organs. So, we talk about the visceral reactions, or we talk about the viscera. So it's VE. We have two multipolar neurons in order. So if I were to draw that, I would have one star here and it would go out. It would make a connection, which I draw with a kind of carrot. And we have a second nerve that goes out. So we have two nerves here. VE goes to places like the heart, smooth muscle organs like the digestive system, or the arteries, and any glands of the body that secrete. So we have VE is involuntary motor versus SE is voluntary, skeletal. And then we have sensory. Now, sometime in your life when you were in elementary school, oops, did not mean to do that. So we have so many more senses than 5. You probably got told at some point that you had 5 senses, which would be, you probably got told you had touch, hearing, taste, vision, and smell, right? Those were the 5 you were told. But we have at least double that, probably more, because we have so many more senses than just 5. We have something called general sensory, which are the senses you feel over your whole body. So they get called somatic afferent or sensory afferent. And then we also have special sensory, which is the special senses. Now, since special senses are only carried on cranial nerves, they're all in your head, not spinal nerves. We'll cover special sensory later. But let's talk about general senses for a moment. General senses are any sensation you feel all over your body. Pain, you feel pain from the top of your head down to the toes. Temperature, hot and cold, and sometimes people think that these are 2 different senses, but it feels all over. Touch, which is actually can be broken down into deep touch, light touch, vibrational touch. Itch is its own sense, and we know that there are people that would rather feel pain than feel itch. That's why you scratch a mosquito bite until it bleeds, is because it feels better to make it hurt. And proprioception is the one that most people never hear about until they take an actual formal science class. It is the sense of the length of your muscles. It's how you can tell the difference between the weight of a stapler and a piece of chalk, which is a demonstration I frequently do in class. It's how you know where you are in space. SA is carried by one unipolar neuron. And the way we draw that is we have the sensory, we do a little circle, and we do this. And that is one unipolar neuron from start to finish. So we need to talk about neural mapping. And when we say neural mapping, we have to think about how to draw these nerves into the spinal cord and out to the body. So we have 5 basic steps that I've come up with. First of all, you have to determine which modality it is, SE, VE, or SA. Now, there is something called VA, visceral afferent. We are not going to deal with that in this class. That is its own group, and we are just not going to do that. We have to determine the cell type. Are we multipolar or unipolar? Are we going to figure out where the cell body goes? If it's multipolar, it goes into the spinal cord. If it's unipolar, it goes into the dorsal root ganglion. Then we have to figure out which root is used. Ventral root is motor, dorsal root is sensory, and we have to figure out which location we're going to. You may have heard the expression location, location, location. Well, in the body, it determines where things travel to. So if it's the deep muscles of the back or the skin of the back, we get the dorsal primary ramus. If it goes anywhere else, meaning any of parts of the limb, upper limb, lower limb, any anterior organs, that is all ventral primary ramus. For example, if you had a nerve, which would be sensory, for stepping on a rock, ouch, that hurt, right? So pain for stepping on a rock, you would use 1, it would be an SA nerve because it is sensory. The neural cell body would go into the dorsal root ganglion, that's 2. 3, the axon. The axon has to go through the dorsal root because it is sensory. Now, remember, the axon has to go all the way into the spinal cord, but the cell body stays in the dorsal root ganglion. And then because it's foot, because you stepped on it, that was part of my criteria, it would go out the ventral primary ramus. And then I label it with the 1 to say that this is my example 1. 2, I'm going to move my foot off the rock. Well, movement is skeletal muscle. It's choice. It's voluntary. So if I'm moving motor, that is a multipolar neuron. It has to go in the spinal cord. That's part 2. Multipolar neurons go in the spinal cord. The axon must go through the ventral root. That's 3 because it's motor. And then we have to think about where we're going. So it is going to go out the ventral ramus because it's going to move the foot. It's not going to the back, it's going to the foot. It goes out the primary ramus, and that is my example 2. 3, itch on the back. Well, we have to think, okay, itch, that's SA, so we have that unipolar neuron. Its axon goes, the cell body goes into the dorsal root ganglion, which we see there. And then the axon has to go through the dorsal root. So you see where it's going through the dorsal root into the spinal cord. And then we have to say, where are we going? So itch on the back is the skin of the back. And if we go up to our rules, we'll see that under number 5, if we are going to the skin of the back, we go out the dorsal primary ramus. So you can see that the green axon goes out the dorsal primary ramus. And I've labeled it with a 3. Example 4, you're going to stretch. This is going to involve deep muscles of the back, because I specifically said that is the piece, so you're going to stretch it. So I have, well, I'm moving because I'm stretching. So that means it's multipolar. Multipolar goes into the spinal cord. And then I have to think about where the axon goes. The axon goes out the ventral root, which is how I've drawn it. And then we think about where it's headed to. And since I'm going to the deep muscle of the back, I go out the dorsal primary ramus. Okay, the hard one, the thing that gets weird. Example 5, increase of heart rate. That means by definition, this is VE because the heart is about voluntary or involuntary motor. It's about viscera. So this has 2 multipolar neurons. The first multipolar neuron goes into the spinal cord. The axon then exits the ventral root because it's still motor, and it goes all the way down and then comes back into the paravertebral ganglion. I like to say, and then it got weird because it's going to exit. It's going to make a connection to a second multipolar neuron in the paravertebral ganglion, which the axon is then going to go out the other piece and then out the ventral primary ramus. The key here is I want you to look at the colors. The pink one goes far, comes back in, and then the purple one comes around. They have to make the loop-de-loop. They don't go in and out like a duck and dive. They have to make a loop-de-loop, and that's just part of the thing about VE being just that little bit weirder than the others.